Hi friends, my name is Emily and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing my March reading wrap-up. I'm trying to assess how much children's lit is in here. Not that much, so I think I'm just going to throw it all in together and timestamp everything. So the first thing that I read is The Magic Cap by Mireille, Messier and Charlotte Parent. I got a press release from Milky Way Picture Books about this through my freelance work right now. We have these two kids, Izora and Arlo, who are living in this little cottage on the edge of the woods. Their hedgehog, Crispin, gets sick. They appeal to the gnomes in the woods for help to save Crispin. P with a P, Crispin. And they offer like the last of their food to these gnomes, and then the gnomes, spoiler alert, the hedgehog doesn't die. It's a children's book. I really loved the illustrations. They were just a feast for the eyes. I think it will be really fun because in so many of the pictures where the kids go into the woods and they're like appealing to the gnomes but they don't see any gnomes, like you can see little pointy red hats sticking out of various places. So I think if you have little kids and you're reading this picture book with them, like looking for the gnome hats, counting the gnome hats could be really fun, and just the illustrations themselves are beautiful. Like I loved the color palette. I love how like round and soft everything is. So I feel like this is just a fun little fairy tale-ish, folklore-ish picture book, and I really appreciated having the opportunity to read it early. I finished that on March 2nd. It was something new to me, an arc that I received through work, and I gave it 4 to 5 stars. Then I read The Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Lynn. This is Tan's debut fantasy novel inspired by the Chinese legend of the moon goddess. This is a book that I read because my mom wanted me to. So my mom always gives me all of these books because I don't have enough books, clearly. And she's like, oh, you gotta read this one. I have been trying to make an effort to read the books that she sends me home with. This, in theory, sounds like it could work for me. Like it's playing with folklore, it's playing with folklore that I'm not familiar with, so I get to learn a little bit of something. I had issues with this book, so I found the prose itself to be unreadable with my eyes. It was just too flowery, it felt overwritten, and so I started listening to it on audio, and the audio I feel like worked better. Like there's something about having somebody else tell you a story and have them be very descriptive that I find more palatable than having to drag my eyes over really flowery prose. So that was the first thing. Switching formats was the only reason I finished this, because if I had to physically read it, I couldn't bring myself to do it. The plot is a little all over the place. She is the secret daughter of the moon goddess. She's not supposed to exist, and she ends up like leaving, like running away so that her mom doesn't get in trouble, and working in the service of the prince. So she's like hiding who she is, but she's secretly trying to earn a favor from the emperor to get her mom free, because her mom has been banished to the moon and cannot leave ever. And so she's like on the one hand working on this like larger quest of having purchased her mom's or earned her mom's freedom, reuniting her family, having that be possible for her and them. And then she gets sort of distracted by like a love triangle that can't happen between the prince and the leader of the army, and then she joins the army for a little bit, and like it meanders and it gets messy, and I don't know to what end. You just have these two powerful men who have fallen in love with Xingyi. Li Wei's like the good boy, the emperor's son, and then Wang Shi is the bad boy, the leader of the army, right? It feels like a very forced love triangle when like the larger plot could have been fine. Like working to free her mom could have been a perfectly adequate amount of story to deal with. Now this is a debut, and I feel like this is a learning curve for authors. Like debut novels often have too much. The cherry on top of the shit sundae is that Xingyin is like too overpowered. Like she runs into problems, but they all just sort of solve nicely for her. you have things that will be positioned as like really big problems, really big tasks, really big quests, and then they're solved instantly. Like, it feels like there's no stakes. It feels like she can't fail. And so by the end of the book, I was like, I don't know why. I don't know why, period. In the end, what I'm left with is this is a neat idea, like retelling the story, the daughter of the moon goddess, like playing with these myths, is a neat idea, but the execution was not there for me. I finished it on March 4th. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars because it is a debut. Perhaps with subsequent books, like if Sulin Tan continues to play with myths, maybe I will consider picking up another book by her just to see where she's at with like the development of her writing, because like I think the mythology stuff is interesting. This is very much a clunky debut. So then I read Love from Mecca to Medina by S.K. Ali. So this is the sequel to Love from A to Z, which is I don't know how like widely that's circulated. I know it was very popular at Indigo because it is a Muslim Canadian woman who is writing, and Indigo likes to spotlight Canlit. So it was a title that I was familiar with, but I hadn't read the first book. So in the first book, we watch Adam and Zainab get together. This is the sequel, which I jumped into without reading the first book because I needed to for my freelance work. And I don't know if that was a mistake because this is very much a contained narrative. So Adam and Zainab are living apart. They have made a commitment to each other. They are like not legally married, but they are, I think they've done a religious ceremony so that they are sort of married in the eyes of God. However, they are not planning on moving in together and living together until Zainab is done school. They're very much in different places, and they are supposed to be getting together over Thanksgiving break for a sex vacation because they are married teenagers. This is young adult, by the way. They are married teenagers and they're getting together for a sex vacation. And we do get to hear about how Zainab is like super stressed from school and she's excited to go on this sex vacation with Adam, and she and her sister go and like buy lingerie, and she's very much looking to spending all of this sexy time with her husband. Adam has MS and is right now in a period of reprieve. So he can walk right now. He's feeling really good right now. And so he decides, instead of going on the sex vacation, he wants to go on a pilgrimage, a religious pilgrimage from Mecca to Medina, while he can make this journey for himself, because there's no guarantee that by the time the next break comes around that he will be in a place to do that himself, and he really wants to make this religious pilgrimage. And so they end up switching their plans to go on this pilgrimage, and the whole time is just a series of miscommunications where you're like, why are these two even together? Like, he's spending all of his time networking with an old love interest, because he's an artist and her brother does something with art, and like he's unemployed right now, and so he's networking, trying to find a way to make money for himself and like prove himself successful to his wife that he doesn't get to see all the time. And she's just like, I wish he would spend time with me. Like, I am exhausted. I'm burnt out from school. I'm burnt out from being like experiencing all of this racism and xenophobia at school. Like, I just wanted our sex vacation and now we're going on this religious pilgrimage, and she's not in a place to be spiritual about it. And so you spend a lot of time watching them fail to connect. Like, they're like ships passing in the night. They're on the same trip. They're moving in the same direction on the same pilgrimage, but they're like nowhere close to each other in terms of being on the same page. Maybe this is because I did not read the first book, but the failure to communicate in this book really had me wondering, other than the fact that they're married in the eyes of God, why, when their lives are moving in such different directions, they are clinging on to this relationship. Because it seems like they are very different people moving in very different directions. That made it hard to enjoy the book. Like, I really appreciated seeing young Muslims doing a religious activity on page. I thought that was interesting. It's not something that I'm privy to, right? Very possibly because I didn't read the first book, I'm not rooting for them. I didn't see them get together, see them fall in love. But I mean, I can't imagine this being the sequel that anybody wanted. right? Like if you loved the romance that allegedly exists in Love from A to Z, the first book, I can't imagine wanting to see these characters that you really shipped, that you really rooted for, that got together against all odds, that you want to watch them fall apart and like not be cute together. Like I feel like it's one of those things where a lot of YA romances, people want a sequel until they get it. I think I was very much the same with Becky Albertalli's What If It's Us. Adam Silvera and Becky Albertalli wrote What If It's Us, and it's about these two young people who get together in New York over a summer because they happen to be like same time, same place, like fate brings them together. And the sequel, you learn that they've broken up. Obviously novels need conflict and so I'm not sure that romances necessarily lend themselves to sequels because novels need conflict, and if you're looking at a romance, obviously the romance needs conflict, like the couple needs conflict if they're going to be our characters. So like I don't know, like as an outsider who didn't read the first novel, I didn't root for them as a couple, and I can imagine that if you read the first book and hadn't read the second book and are thinking about it, to know that like your couple is struggling and by the end of it you're like, why are these people together? I don't know how this landed with the target audience, I guess is basically what I'm saying. If I didn't have to write a blurb for this for work, I would have DNF'd this. I finished that on March 5th. I gave it 2.5 out of 5 stars. Like, it was okay. Like, it's a 50%. It's obviously not actively bad. Like, SKLE is an experienced writer. The quality of the writing's good. The plotting, I thought, was good. The character development was good. I just don't buy that, like, this is a thing that people wanted or needed because it's a sequel to a romance that sort of breaks the romance a little bit. Then I was feeling a little bit reading slumpy, so I decided to pick up an old favorite and I listened to First Test by Tamora Pierce on audio. I've talked about these books so many times. I love the Kell books. I love that Kell doesn't have magic, and so we're watching her step into this traditionally men's space to try and take up this role publicly now that it is legally allowed for women to train for knighthood. In reading these, again, as an adult and reading them critically, I'm always like, there's more social class stuff that I'm aware of because women are allowed to be warriors. It's just not noble women. It comes down to class, which is something that I guess I really hadn't internalized because Kell's like, oh, well, I guess I'll just, like, if I can't be a knight, if I don't make it out of probation, like, I guess I could wait to join this, like, other lesser institute for, like, common women, the Queen's Riders. But, like, she really wants this role of her status, role that she's entitled to as a noble person. So, like, if her goal was to do justice, to learn how to defend people, protect the small, there are other ways to do that. She just wouldn't have the authority of a noble title, a noble knighthood, right? She wouldn't be in the same position of power. That is something that I'm now thinking about, how privileged Kell is, and what she's demanding is this privileged status role, right? So I finished that on March 5th. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It was a reread, obviously. Then I decided to DNF Beatrice and Croc Harry by Lawrence Hill. So this was Lawrence Hill's step into children's literature. It was a very big deal at the organization that I'm freelancing for last year, and I was trying to go through our backlist and read just some of the titles to familiarize myself with the body of literature that exists behind this organization that's on our reading list. I say our, like I have any job security there, their reading list. So I had access to the audiobook through Libby. Unfortunately, Lawrence Hill is the audiobook narrator. And I say that because this is the story about a little girl. It's about a young girl. Lawrence Hill has this adult man kind of whispery voice. And I couldn't just get into the audiobook because you have somebody who clearly is an older man giving voice to a young girl, and it just didn't work. So I decided to DNF the audiobook. Because this book is popular, the ebook for it, the wait list is miles long. So at some point I will get access to the ebook, and at that point I will try this like hot title from work again. Started and like decided to DNF that on March 8th. And I borrowed that from the library. Again, this is the year of like DNFing things pretty liberally. Then I read Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption by Stephen King. So this is a Red Rum mini. So this year with my patrons, we are reading different seasons alongside the regularly scheduled Stephen King reads. And so once a quarter, we're gonna pick up these seasonally themed novellas. So Hope Springs Eternal is the first one here. So at the end of Q1, chatted about Rita Hayworth. Now, I will say, and I think this is something that a lot of folks agree with, the movie completely overshadows the book. I have read Rita Hayworth multiple times now, and the Shawshank movie just is what lives in my head. Like I can't overwrite one versus the other. They are very close retellings, and I mean, it's a great story either way. Like, it's just the hook. I loved reading it again. I love the movie. There's not much to say. So I finished that on March 8th. I gave it 4 to 5 stars, and that was a reread. Then for work, I finally got access to a Dropbox from HarperCollins, I think, in which they put the full text for Anne, an adaptation of Anne of Green Gables, sort of, by Kathleen Gros. So this is a queer, modern graphic novel retelling of Anne of Green Gables, in which Anne is a child in foster care who has come to live with Mireille and Matthew in a big apartment complex called Avonlea. They're like the caretakers of the apartment building, superintendents. She again becomes like special friends with Diana. It's all of the hijinks of Anne of Green Gables, minus drinking the alcohol and getting drunk. Left that out. But there is a dance, there's a prom, there's a queer date moment. Diana is not just a kindred spirit. And I thought it was really cute. I thought it was a really great way to modernize Anne, make it more accessible while keeping the same like timeless plot points. Like, I think that's one of the reasons why Anne of Green Gables sticks around despite it being so old, is that the plot points are still super relevant. Like Anne being a little bit hot-tempered and acting before she thinks, still relatable now, and doing sort of foolish things like being dared to walk along a fence and then like falling and breaking her arm or leg, still a thing that like kids would do and find relatable. And so I do like seeing it in the modern graphic novel format. And I think the queering of it was really cute, because I think there's space for it when you have a character who has such a close kindred spirit. Obviously you couldn't have that sort of relationship in the original printing. But queer people have always existed, and so to find that space in the narrative and to open up that space for a queering of Anne, I think is really lovely. This is available for purchase now. I finished that on March 8th. I gave it 4 to 5 stars, and it was an ARC that I received for work. Continuing on with the Tamora Pierce reread, I was still feeling kind of down, and so I decided to pick up Page by Tamora Pierce, which is the second book in the series. Not much to say about this. Eventually we'll talk about it critically in its own separate video. So I finished that on March 9th. I gave it 5 to 5 stars, and that is a reread. Then I do have a reading vlog where I end up getting sucked into, it's like slices of life from March. I get sucked into reading a book by Susin Nielsen. It's called Tremendous Things by Susin Nielsen. I actually got to, through work, attend the workshop, like the discussion where Susin Nielsen was talking to the children. And this is the whole thing that prompted this. So the organization that I'm working for puts on programming for children, some of it digital. And so they were having Susin Nielsen speak to, I think, high school, like grade 8 and high school students. The teachers chose Susin Nielsen, and so we all grew up watching Degrassi, classic Canadian television, and who wrote for Degrassi? Susin Nielsen. So Susin Nielsen is a big name. Her writing for children is great, but the excitement behind her and like who she is entirely coming from the teachers, because they're like, oh my god, it's Susin Nielsen. She was on Degrassi as the janitor and she writes for Degrassi, right? Like, teachers were really excited about this. They picked this book, Tremendous Things, and then the school board read it. And they were like, oh no. And they sent us an email and they were like, we need you to communicate to Susan that she cannot talk about the puberty related things in this book. And because there were, like, from the blurb on the book, we were like, okay, so Wilbur has 2 moms, Wilbur has a gay best friend, they're talking about doing like a Queer Eye makeover on Wilbur. And we were like, is Wilbur queer or questioning? Is it the queer content? Like, when the school board says don't talk about the puberty related content and nothing else, and they don't elaborate on that, we're like, okay, is the school board homophobic? Like, and it could very well be that they are taking a more conservative stance. If the teachers had chosen this book because the characters were queer and they like the queer rep, and then we told Susan, like, the board wants you to not talk about queerness in this text. We wanted to know. We wanted to know what the concern was and if the school board was homophobic. And it turns out the school board is not homophobic, at least not in this case. This book involved an excessive amount of discussions of Wilbur's penis, who he has named Jeremiah, and also what he is doing with Jeremiah and what Jeremiah is doing by itself, and the delights of squirting your butthole with a bidet and how that feels good. So needless to say, the school didn't necessarily want Susin Nielsen talking about that or answering questions about that. I just find it delightful, and this continues to happen, where we have these texts on our reading list because we're picking the presenters, and Susin Nielsen put on a fantastic presentation, like, so engaging. Loved it. I loved her talking about, like, her journey to becoming a writer and, like, where she gets these ideas for stories and her, like, writing process. Like, that was great. But it is one thing to choose people for their presentations and another to give people no prep work, like nothing other than what the publishers give you as like an organization that is making recommendations. And it's something that I find baffling. I continue to find baffling, I'm not really in a position to like reinvent the wheel, but I love finding these texts where as I read the backlist, I'm like, oh shit, like this could have had a content warning. And I'm going to talk about 2 more of Susin Nielsen's books that are on our reading list, on this organization's reading list, where I'm like, I would have loved a content warning. Thanks. And we don't have them because we're taking the blurbs from the publishers, and the publishers don't do that. Tremendous Things, that's the story behind it. That's the reason why I picked up all of the Susin Nielsen that I'm going to talk about. Phenomenal text. Absolutely loved it. Pulled on my heartstrings. By the end of it, I was weeping. Wilbur has a isolated existence. He's an odd human, doesn't have many friends his own age. He's actually best friends with his 85-year-old neighbor named Sal, and they have matching red Speedos. It was heartbreaking and devastating and heartwarming, and like, I want a copy. I want to reread this book. And I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to explore and discover this book because of this like weird moment with the school board. If you're looking for real YA, messy YA, really well written YA, in some ways I'm a little bit reminded of John Green, but Susin Nielsen's characters feel like actual kids in the way that John Green's characters do not. Like, John Green often tackles messy issues in a lot of his texts, but his narrators are too smart. They are like tiny poets, tiny scholars, which is fine if you know what you're getting into, but if you want like real children and like the messiness, the realism of John Green, I feel like Susin Nielsen, some great comp text there. I finished that on March 11th. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It was a new buy on Kindle because I couldn't find it at the library. I would highly recommend checking out Susin Nielsen's works. Then I read a romance, again looking for something lighter. I read Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail by Ashley Herring Blake. This is the second in the Brightfall series. We follow Astrid. Ooh, is that a spoiler? I guess it's not a spoiler. We follow Astrid, who has recently broken up with her fiance. We see that happen on page in Delilah Green Doesn't Care. She ends up working with this like sexy lesbian carpenter on the construction of this local hotel. So Astrid is the designer, Jordan, the sexy lesbian, is the like carpenter, the builder. And obviously this is a sapphic romance, and romance ensues, and it was very cute, very heartwarming. I like Ashley Herring Blake's writing. I have definitely been, just because of life circumstances, looking for lighter reads where I know there's going to be a happy ending. So I finished that on March 14th. I gave it 4 to 5 stars, and I borrowed that from the library. Then I read another Susin Nielsen book, We Are All Made of Molecules by Susin Nielsen. This cover is super eye-catching. I was always looking at it, and I always meant to pick it up and never did. So this is a backlist title from the organization that I'm working for right now, and we're looking at 13-year-old Stuart, who is academically gifted and socially inept. And his mother has died, and his father has started dating a woman who has an older daughter. That daughter is the not so smart, hot, popular girl at school. And so now they are living together, and she's like desperately trying to hide the fact that the reason her parents got divorced is that her dad has come out as gay and is living like in a tiny house in their backyard, like very close together. And like she's hiding the fact from people that her father is gay, and that's the reason her family's sort of fallen apart in her eyes. She really doesn't want people to know that she has Stuart as a like step sibling of sorts at this point. Stuart is ruthlessly bullied by the older boys until they find out that he is living in the house where the hottest girl in school lives. And so then the bully sort of befriends starts to befriend and use Stuart to get in the house. And this is the thing, this feels really 2000, like even from like the descriptions of the popular girls' clothing, and I feel like this is something that's gonna date YA always, is like if characters are meant to be fashionable and they're wearing like leggings and Ugg boots and a mini skirt, you're like, oh, that was popular when I was in high school, oof. That's not how the teens dress now. Not only that, but like the language, I don't think a lot of people today would be quite as embarrassed if one of their parents were queer. I don't like the use of some of the language in here. It is accurate for the time, but I was not prepared for the on-page sexual assault that happens. I think you need to know that at a certain point, the mean boy, the bully, will get Ashley drunk, and he will get Ashley alone in a bedroom. Also, there is homophobia. There is the use of the F slur spray painted on the side of a building, the gay dad's home. And these were things that I was not prepared for. The idea that it's like these two like opposites have to come together, like the loseriest loser and the popularist mean girl are now cohabitating and they're kind of siblings, sort of like, how will this work out for the family? Like that's sort of how it's pitched and how it's been blurbed, like this coming together. But there was a lot of surprise violence, and I think you need to know that going in. I finished this on March 17th. I gave it 3 to 5 stars because I found some of the language and the surprise violence really jarring, and it wasn't what I was expecting. I think coming out of Tremendous Things, where it was really, it's her most recent book too, Tremendous Things was like an issue-based book, but it was also like a warm hug in many ways. It felt relatable and awkward and very much captured like the awkwardness of being a teen and like high school as I remember it. But this felt it felt a little like 13 Reasons Why, like spectacle in ways that I wasn't expecting, especially coming from her previous work where I was prepared for hard issues, but I wasn't prepared for like graphicness. So yeah, I didn't super enjoy that reading experience, and I did borrow that from the library. Also from the library, I borrowed Optimists Die First by Susin Nielsen, and this is following 16-year-old Petula, who has shut herself off from the world following the death of her younger sister on her watch. Maxine, I believe, is the younger sister, and she is a much younger sister. She had a blanket or something, like a toy or something with eyes, buttons sewn on, and the sister was taking a nap with this thing while Petula was babysitting, and she like sucked on the button and choked and died. So the family is broken. Like, the parents are struggling. Petula has perhaps untreated OCD. Like, she's developed a lot of rituals, and that's another thing with Susin Nielsen's books, like with We Are All Made of Molecules. Again, I feel like there are hints at diagnoses. Like, I think that Stuart in We Are All Made of Molecules is not neurotypical. I don't know in what way he is neurodivergent, but I'm thinking it would be pretty safe to read him as autistic. Petula, I think we could read as having like pretty severe anxiety and OCD, and these characters never receive diagnoses or treatments, which I think is, on the one hand, relatable. Like, a lot of people can't afford mental health care and diagnosis takes a long time. But on the other hand, it might just be nice for readers to have like an on-page, like, this character is autistic. You don't have to like read between the lines and guess, like, this is representation. Petula has developed some compulsions, some rituals around keeping herself alive post the trauma of the death of the sister on her watch. She ends up in a like art therapy class at school, and that's the only mention we get of therapy, is this like a therapeutic activity, is this thing through school that's like not going well. Like, the kids sort of do their own therapy because the teacher isn't adequately able to do that. She's also meant to be working with much younger kids, so she's very useless for high school students, and I feel like that might be a realistic portrayal of mental health care that is free and available, but it's also not super encouraging. Anyway, so this class of art therapy people end up working together and like working to help each other work through some of their issues. And the love interest in this book, Jared, he's also in this art therapy class. Very cool, very popular. Don't understand why he's here. He's very not reflective. Like, he refuses to talk about why he's in this therapy class, and it ends up building up as a lie between them. And Petula, I didn't enjoy this as much because Petula really takes this out of context and like over exaggerates this in my mind. Like, you've lied about everything. When really he's just lied about something that he's ashamed of. Nielsen's writing has this like brand of like real life oddities that come off as humorous, and I enjoy it. Like, there's a cat in this book that is angry and just anger shits, and so you'll like be doing something and you're like, ah, secret turd. And like that's like a recurring thing throughout the book. Like, they're doing something and there's like, surprise, the cat had an angry poop in your shoe, angry poop on the couch. And like, there's something like that in a lot of Nielsen's books. Like, there's just like we all have these like weird, like real life oddities that you just sort of live with and you get used to. I appreciate that that's part of like Nielsen's world building. I like that. I like her writing. I will continue to read her writing. I think you need to be mentally prepared for them. I did like this a little bit more than We Are All Made of Molecules. I finished that on March 19th. I gave it 4 to 5 stars and I borrowed it from the library. Then I read This Is Your Brain on Birth Control by Sarah E. Hill, who's a PhD. Picked this up sort of on a whim. It was just like, this is available at your library. And I was like, sure, all right. And so it's looking at how hormones shape personality, like who you are. So like when you change your hormones, it changes who you are, what you are interested in, who you are interested in. This is all very like cis and heterosexual. For cis women who are on birth control, it changes how cis heterosexual men respond. Studies apparently show that cis heterosexual men find naturally cycling, so not on a hormonal birth control, women more attractive in like the fertile phase of their cycle versus not. Like, it's just a lot of really interesting things. I feel like I learned a lot just not just about hormones, but like about fertility. I thought it was interesting that, especially how science finds it justifiable to skip doing research on women because of the hormonal cycle, and so they want to take out as many variables, and so it takes like months longer to do research on female specimens than male specimens because you have to track people at the same point in their cycle always, which means that studies take longer, which means that it's harder to get funded, which is why they're underdone. Like, you see this problem in which drugs are often not tested on women because it's like the funding isn't there for it. Oh, she also talked about how just the whole academic system makes it hard to do like these long-term studies. If you want to get like continue to be employable, you have to pump out a certain number of papers a year so that you have this body of published work behind you. And so you have to be doing quick studies to build the body of works to basically keep and earn your job. And so there is no like systemic support for doing longer studies because of this like rat race that they put young academics, young scientists, researchers on. I thought that was interesting as well, like looking at some of the institutional issues. And what I really enjoyed about This Is Your Brain on Birth Control is at the same time I have been reading out of The Remedy, Queer and Trans Voices on Health and Healthcare. And so when you think about how like cis and heteronormative the research that exists on birth control, hormones, and then you hear on the other hand how little research and medical understanding there is around queer and trans health. Like at one point there is a contribution in here where a trans person is going to Reddit. They are going to community boards being like, how will this affect my body? Pooling communal knowledge to get sort of an informal consensus on what to advocate for when they go to the doctors, because the doctors don't have adequate training on how to treat trans, non-binary folks. So it was interesting to read these two sort of close together to see that like it's not great for cis women, and like it's really not great for anybody who's not a cis man, basically. Like medicine on people who are not cis men, not great. So I really enjoyed this. I thought it was fascinating, and it wasn't just about the birth control pill, it was about like hormones in general, and also sort of navel gazing at like the institution that produces this study, the research, the body of research. So I finished this on March 24th. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I borrowed that from the library. Finally this month I read Christine. So this was the Red Rum Book Club for March. It's a patron exclusive book club, and we did the live stream for that not that long ago. Christine is a weird read. It was a reread for me, and the last time I read this I was in high school. I was in my final year of high school. Very much the same age and position actually as the characters in this novel. So Dennis and Arnie, our sort of main characters, are both in their final year of high school and thinking about their future, vaguely what they want to do. Arnie in this case is becoming really rebellious, like getting out from under the thumb of his very controlling parents. Dennis is starting to realize like, oh gosh, like this is the last of certain things, like this is the last of whatever like experiences in high school. And so at the time I really enjoyed it. Rereading it now, I still really enjoyed it, and I don't know if it's nostalgia or just it's fun to see characters doing something wacky, like investigating a haunted car. Like the absurdity layered over the realism of like, this is a time of change in your life, I thought was really fun. The novel is not without problems. So the novel has 5 parts, a prologue, part 1, part 2, part 3, and an epilogue. 4 out of 5 parts are first person narration from Dennis and limited to his point of view. The second part of the novel, the middle part of the novel, Dennis is in the hospital and the narrative switches to third person omniscient, and we are in the heads of a lot of people throughout this time. Arnie, other people who are near Christine or interacting with Christine and Arnie and seeing a shift and getting bad vibes off the car. Then in the third part where Dennis resumes first person narration, he tells us he's talking to a character and they fill him in and he's like, I'm not going to repeat it here for you folks because I already told you that in some detail. And I was like, oh, this doesn't make sense. Dennis is not God. He wasn't sitting on the shoulder of some of these characters as they died and we were in their heads as they died, bearing witness to their deaths with this third person omniscient narrator. There's moments that just don't make sense. Pacing wise, I feel like it slows down. Like, we're gonna see this, I think, a lot with Stephen King's books, because by this point in his career, he has a name for himself. He has some big titles behind him. And there's this like, there is a running joke where like Stephen King could write about anything. Like,
okay, for my 307th book, this couple is attacked by a lamp monster. Ooh, ooh.
You're not even trying anymore, are you? When can I have it?
Like, sometimes it does feel like that people are going to greenlight anything because it's Stephen King, and you have like a real mismatch in the quality. Like, I would love to look at some point, what are the market contemporaries at the time? Like, what is influencing what publishing is willing to publish, what they think will just sell. Like, you know how post Hunger Games, there was a huge boom in publishing of sort of indiscriminate young adult dystopian novels. And like, we look at them now, reading them 10 years later, you're like, these are actively bad, but they sold. Like, they didn't receive a lot of editing. They clearly didn't receive a lot of like critique on like developing a world that makes sense and is logical, but they sold because people were hungry for dystopia. I would love to at some point go through around the publication of some of Stephen King's books and see what the market contemporaries were, to see if that has any influence on like them being looser with the quality of what's coming out, because some of his books are fantastic. Others are just like, who published this? Who thought this was printable? This is a mess. But it's Stephen King. It has the brand of Stephen King on it. So I feel like there's some interesting research there in my future. I can recognize that Christine is not a perfect book. I did enjoy it. I had a fun time with it. Finished that on March 28th. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars and it was a reread for myself. And that wraps up March. Before we go, I would like to remind folks that the book club in April, we are reading White is for Witching by Helen Oyeyemi. In this series, we are exploring the haunted house together, and we started with The Haunting of Hill House. I have a live stream for that. That's public if you want to sort of see where we're starting from, see where we're building on. We are going to be reading this and discussing this. We're meeting on Wednesday, April 26th at 7:30 p.m. Toronto time. I would love for you to join. This is free for everybody, and the live stream is already set up now, so if you go, you find it, I will link it. You can hit the notifications so that when it goes live, you'll get notified, because it is a little while away. It can get lost, right? So I would love for folks to read along and to join me in this discussion and exploring the haunted house together. Before we go, we have to thank my patrons who make videos like this possible. Thank you, patrons, for your support. It really means a lot. If you are interested in becoming a patron and having access to patron exclusive content like the Stephen King book clubs, the link for the Patreon page is in the description box down below. I hope that you are all doing well, that you are staying safe, and I will see you soon with another video. Bye!